the rest of us, we're going to stick around. We're going to finish. We're going into 1 Samuel chapter 23. We're actually nearly done the book of 1 Samuel. And the only thing I don't like about 1 Samuel is that it ends on such a sad note. Like, it's so sad. But it does mean that it also is ending on a major turning point where things are about to change. And we're seeing that. We're seeing as Saul continues to go further and further into his doom that David is just kind of naturally just becoming this rising star in Israel. And we're seeing it more and more and more. We saw it again last week as Saul again sunk to a whole new depth. He went way too far. That he was not only was he willing to kill his own citizens, he was willing to kill the priesthood. Like he has absolutely lost it. And this week, let's just read the first 6 verses here, and then we'll get into it. It says, when David was told, look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they're looting at the threshing floors. He inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go and attack these Philistines? The Lord answered him, go, attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, here in Judah we are afraid. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the Philistine forces? So once again David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him, go down to Keilah, for I am going to give the Philistines into your hand. So David and his men went to Keilah, fought the Philistines, and carried off their livestock. He inflicted heavy losses on the Philistines, and he saved the people of Keilah. Now Abiathar, son of Amalek, had brought the ephod down with him when he fled to David at Keilah. Okay, a couple things happening here. First off, we know that at the end of chapter 22, David was called by the Lord, okay, no longer hide out in the fortresses of your enemy, come back to the Holy Land, come back to the Promised Land. And he does, right? And you know, great respect for David. He's being called back to go into the lion's den. He's being called back to go back where he's being hunted for those that are pursuing him, who want to trap him and destroy him. But he listens to the Lord because the Lord plays that heavy of a role in his life, has that significant of a role in his life. And I think that is something that is important for us to see as well today, is are we willing to make that same kind of sacrifice? And we talked about that last week. But not only that, once he arrives, he sees that the Philistines are fighting against Keilah. Now, what's not mentioned here, and it's the reason why I wanted to read the first 6, is because at the end in verse 6, I don't know about you, but I'm wondering, where is Israel's army? Why is Israel not defending its own city? Why is it allowing its own city to be attacked? We're going to learn more about this particular city later on, but one of the things about the city is it is a walled city. This is not a tiny little hamlet or an insignificant little town. This is a prominent place with walls to guard it, which means that they are likely being sieged. This is no small task. Where is the army? And the reason I want to go all the way to 6, it says, now Abiathar, son of Amalek, had brought the ephod down with him when he fled to David at Keilah. Now, when did he flee? He fled after, remember that guy Doge or Doug or however you want to say his name, he took the army up to kill all of the priests. So what Saul had done was create the perfect opportunity for the Philistines to attack. He took the army away from a defensive position, brought them up into this one spot to do some sort of mad atrocity, and allowed his people to be vulnerable to attack. Now, we've talked about this before. This was a normal behavior that happened a lot. Neighboring nations would often invade and raid and try and get as much as they could. They were trying to essentially just be big bullies and take all their lunch money and go. Like, that's what they were trying to do. They're trying to take without actually earning themselves. And that's why it says they're attacking the threshing floors. What are they going after? They want their food because winter's coming and we need to eat. And so once again, this city is under siege. And another thing that we need to see here is, because each and every one of us would probably have a similar impulse. In fact, all of us are old enough, except for maybe Jordan. He's just a little baby guy. All of us are old enough to remember how you felt on the day that the 9/11 attacks happened. That was like an attack on all of North America itself. It was a personal, raw moment. And there was there's a reason why no one got on the side of maybe we shouldn't get involved or maybe we shouldn't go to war. Everyone went, no, we need to fight back. That was just how it was. We are not going to let them get away with this. They killed so many innocent people. That was the impulse. I think David he's a human being. He's watching his brothers and sisters get assaulted and harassed, and his people are being killed. And although he's not the king yet, he still is bearing that yoke already. But what does he do? His thing isn't, okay, let's march off, men, let's go do it. He says, God, there's a terrible thing that's happened. What should I do? I need to go inquire of the Lord. That's not us most of the time, is it? It can be difficult to hold back on those impulses, especially when they're that strong. When we feel attacked, when we feel violated, when we feel persecuted, when we feel attacked, we say, no, I need to do something now. But David said, no, I'm going to the Lord. So much so that not only did he go to the Lord, I love this, and the men, they were a bit afraid because they're like, okay, and for those of you who don't know, because I didn't until I did the study here, Keilah is in between Jerusalem and Hebron. Where's Hebron? Hebron is where Saul is. That's where his palace is. That's where his main force is kept. Jerusalem, of course, is, we know about Jerusalem, where Jerusalem is, and it's in the same place today as it was then. And Keilah is very close to Hebron. Okay? It would not take much for Saul to send an armed force out to go get David once he's there. He's basically running right into his enemy's backyard. There's a reason why the men are afraid. And I can understand, and I want to also draw a distinction between what David does and what Gideon did. See, Gideon was called to lead the people of God, and Gideon kept trying to get out of it. Right? Well, okay, yeah, the fleece was wet and the floor was dry, but now make the fleece dry and the floor wet. Right? He was trying to find a way out of the situation. And David is going, oh man, what if I heard wrong? I don't want to lead these people to death. I want to go do this. I want to do what I think the Lord has told me. I better go double check and verify. That's what David's doing. When he goes to the Lord a second time, it's not about trying to weasel out or trying to find a new way to get to the thing he wants to do. In fact, it's more, hey, I need to make sure that what I'm doing is right for God. His number one concern is serving the Lord. So in verse 7, so he goes and he does and he defends and he does what the Lord had called him to do, and he inflicts great casualty on the Philistines once again. And it says Saul was told that David had gone to Keilah, and he said, God has delivered him into my hands, right? As I said, it is right there on Saul's doorstep. Oh, God has brought him to me, is what Saul thinks. For David has imprisoned himself by entering a town with gates and bars, right? I told you, this is a walled city. So he sees it as the mouse just walked into the trap. I got him. Now I just got to get there, shut the trap, and I got him. But listen to what he does. This is wild. So Saul called up all of his forces for battle to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. Okay. Now, I don't know how familiar you guys are with medieval war tactics, so I'll just pretend none of you know anything and just go from there. So for the siege, you encircled the town, you cut off supply lines for basically one of three events were going to happen. You would either force them to come out and fight you on a ground where you had the advantage, you would force them to surrender, or you would literally starve them to death because eventually their supply would run out. Now, a couple of things. First off, they really have no time to prepare, right? Like I said, they're on their doorstep. But Saul is literally willing to put his citizens in a situation where he's willing to kill more of his people. Again, to get one man. He would kill the entire city to get one man. Saul has gone mad. When David learned that Saul was plotting against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod. Now, remember they talked about he brought the ephod with him. What ephod is that? ephod of the high priest. He brought it was the special, remember it had the plate on it. I don't know if you remember from the book of Exodus when they're describing when they're building the tabernacle and they're setting up the garb for the high priest. It was like a metal plate on it. It had 12 gemstones, and that was only to be worn by the high priest, which is why no one was wearing it, because they still don't have a high priest yet. Because despite apparently Saul thinking God is with him, he still hasn't made sure that the priesthood has been established. And that one individual, the person that would wear the ephod, they also had an ephod is kind of like a thing that you wear over your clothes. It's kind of like it's more like a robe, but it's kind of like how we wear a sweater, right? You wear a shirt underneath and you put something over top. And so that's how you would wear an ephod. And in the ephod was the pocket where the Urim and Thummim was. If you remember that from back in our book of, when we did the book of Judges, it was the two stones that, and we don't know how it worked, and thank God we don't know how it works, because people would try and make a system that matched that today in order to try and divine the will of God, instead of just praying to God. Like, we have that ability now. We don't need to have colored stones. And so David, knowing that this is how God was communicating with him, he says, okay, bring me the ephod. And he said, Lord, God of Israel, your servant has heard definitely that Saul plans to come to Keilah and destroy the town on account of me. Will the citizens of Keilah surrender me to him? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? And Lord, God of Israel, tell your servant. And the Lord said, he will come down. David asked again, will the citizens of Keilah surrender me and my men to Saul? The Lord said, they will. Of course they will. They just finished one siege. They're not ready for another. So David and his men, about 600 in number, and I'm not sure if you noticed, but that number got bigger, because it seems that wherever David goes, people are just attracted to him, and they want to follow him. They believe in him. They trust him. He's never conscripted anybody. These are all volunteers. 600 in number, they left Keilah and kept moving from place to place. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he did not go there, probably to the great relief of all the citizens there. David stayed in the wilderness strongholds in the hills of the desert of Ziph. Now, if you don't know where the hill country of the desert of Ziph is, it's kind of in the southern part of where Israel is, I think, today. And that was down in the hill country. If you remember when Joshua first came over and they first got in the land, and Caleb said, I want to go down there and fight giants. That's the hill country of Ziph. That's where he's talking about. And that's where David is hiding out right now. David stayed in those wilderness strongholds in the hills of Ziph. Day after day, Saul searched for him. God did not give David into his hands. And while David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. Right now, Saul's not sending an army anymore. He's coming to do it himself. He can't get it done right. You got to do it yourself, right? And so Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. You'll remember from chapter 22. Saul knows about the covenant that Jonathan made with David and was not happy. He was not pleased. So you know that when Jonathan sneaks out of this camp where he's with his father to go meet with David once again, this is at great personal risk to himself, right? Because he had to sneak out. There was no way, people at this point really fear Saul because Saul's gone crazy, and Saul will kill you for just about anything. And so Jonathan says no, because we're going to see his reasoning. He says, don't be afraid, he said. My father Saul will never lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel. I will be second to you, and even my father Saul knows this. I think this is incredible. Remember, Jonathan is the crown prince. Jonathan, according to normal rules of succession and all of that, he will be the next king, and yet even he knows, right? And I think this shows us the relationship that these two men had. Not only these two men, but it also shows us the relationship that these two men had with God, is they recognize, you know what? The Lord is sovereign. And as much as, it may be Jonathan's natural inheritance, he recognizes that God is the supreme authority and that David is next in line. And David, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, David, I will be right there with you. I will serve you, David. David has been promised his entire inheritance, and yet Jonathan, because of his love of God, has no issue with this. Instead, he embraces it fully. That's why it's such a beautiful picture. See, it says the two of them made a covenant before the Lord again. And then Jonathan went home. But David remained at Horesh. Then it says the Ziphites, so David's hiding out in the Ziphite land. It says the Ziphites then went up to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is David not hiding out amongst us in the strongholds at Horesh on the hill of Hekala, south of Jeshurun? Now, your majesty, come down whenever it pleases you to do so, and we will be responsible for giving him into your hands." Saul replied, "The Lord bless you for your concern for me, and go and get more information. Find out where David usually goes and who has seen him there. They tell me he is very crafty. Find out about all the hiding places he uses. Come back to me with a definite information, and then I will go back. I will go with you. And if he is in the area, I will track him down among all of the clans of Judah." And so they set out, went to Ziph ahead of Saul. And now David and his men were in the desert of Maon, in the Arabia south of Jeshimon. Again, this is down in the southlands. They're kind of pushing almost out of Judah at this point. They're trying to, although they have to remain in Judah because God called them there, they're trying to stay as far away from Saul as they can. They set out, they went in Desert Maon, Arabia south of Jeshimon. Saul and his men began the search, and when David was told about it, he went down to the rock and stayed at the desert of Maon. But when Saul heard of this, he also went into the desert of Maon in pursuit of David, and Saul was going alongside. Can you imagine how close this was? Saul was along one side of a mountain, David and his men were on the other, and they were hurrying, trying to get away from Saul. And as Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them, a messenger came to Saul saying, "Come quickly, the Philistines are raiding the land." And then Saul broke off in pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. And that is why they call this place Selah Hamalakoth. And David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. This, I think, is the perfect example of life as a Christian. I feel like I don't hear it much anymore, but I certainly have heard it. Come to the Lord and your life will be great and it'll be made better and all this stuff. First off, it will be made better, but it doesn't mean it's going to be great. See, David, he trusted in the Lord, and maybe you guys have heard this, right? And I've heard this a lot. I've heard a lot from family members even, right? If God is such a good God, then why does he let bad things happen to those who serve him? Many of you have maybe even had that own thought yourself. How could God allow suffering like this to someone who served him so faithfully? I want to ask you, did God send Saul on a pursuit of madness after him? And yet David served both Saul and the Lord very, very faithfully. He was a good man. The fact of the matter is, and we also say this too, right? We say, well, if God is so good, well, we'll make things like, well, why doesn't he just make sin go away? Well, then we don't have free will. By the way, this is one of the best arguments for free will, is that God allows us to make really bad decisions. God allows us to do evil. God allows us to transgress. God allows us to live like Saul. And friends, I think a lot of times it's funny because we love to take the credit when things go well, but we love to pass the blame onto God when things go wrong. God, where were you? God, why didn't you stop this? God, why? Except for if we look at this story, we see God didn't leave David. Was David captured? No. Was David killed? No. Did David become king? Yes. Just as he was promised. Here's the thing, the facts of life are this. Whether you serve God or you don't serve God, there are going to be challenges in this life. The fact of the matter is, how difficult do you want that burden to be? Right? Because you can allow it to the burdens of life to crush you, or you can take on the yoke of Jesus Christ, which is light. We can come alongside someone else who can help carry that burden for us. So we don't have to be crushed by it. But guess what? You still have to carry the burden. It doesn't get us out of that responsibility. It doesn't mean that suddenly all of our life becomes easy peasy and roses. It means that, yes, challenges will come. Yes, difficulties will arise. Yes, there will be negative things that happen in our life. But we can rely on Jesus Christ to help us carry that. We sang a song this morning. Which one was it? I think it was the third one. Forever God is faithful. Forever He is strong. Forever He is with us. Forever, forever. We're not... Sometimes it's in the moment. I'll admit it can be hard to remember that when life is difficult. And we can read that in the Psalms, by the way. Some of the Psalms of David that we have in our Bible were written at this time where he's being pursued. And we can see the humanness of David come out, where things are dark and scary, and he feels alone and terrified. But he knows that he can trust in the Lord, that if he trusts in God, God will see him through. He will make it through. And thank God I've never had to go through a period of life like David has. Day after day, week after week, month after month, being hunted. Am I ever glad that's not me? The challenges of my life pale in comparison. And when I really hold it up and I look at all of the things that Jesus has saved me from, all of the challenges that He's seen me through, right? It's not that those challenges went away. It's that He helped me in a time where it would have crushed me, where it could have broke me, where it could have beat me down. Instead, I came out, I came through, and I came through stronger. And that's the story we see in David here today. See, God came through and God's provision happened in this story. And it was strange. It came in the form of a messenger, and you better believe, right? Let's think about how crazy Saul's getting at this point. Do you really think the messenger came, said, we need to go defend the people, and Saul went, right, duty calls, and he just turned? No, it was probably every general, every commander, every other person that was there with him said, Saul, we have to go. We can't do this anymore. Our people are dying, right? Because it was their wives, their daughters, their sons that were off in these villages being raided. And Saul's quest for madness was brought to a halt, not because of Saul, but because God was always